What's going on with the light? You're probably thinking that because it's kind of nuts in Midnight. We thought this expansion was all fighting the void, but the story right now is screaming that the light could be antagonistic, and that if we're not useful to it, it will destroy us. The Sunwell is aggressive, even down to its sound effects. The light's vanguard is blinded, the light bloom spreads like an invasive species, and behind it, the nuclear threat of the light turning everything to ash looms. You may be wondering what connects all of this. You may not expect it, but it's this. It's a young Xal'atath. There, on her chest, you see an amulet of the sun. And right as her world is turned to ash, salvation is in the void. Xal'atath knows the light will destroy everything we love if given the opportunity. And now, well, she is giving us that opportunity. It's probably the core of her plan. That is the real story driving Midnight, so strap in and prepare for some of the hardest lore to launch with an expansion in years. Something important first though, privacy online keeps getting worse, and AI-driven phishing is now basically indistinguishable from real emails. We've got the likes of the UK's Online Safety Act expanding, and there's still no big federal privacy law in the US. And that's the backdrop in which I use today's sponsor, NordVPN, because with Nord, I can browse from different regions whenever I want to. Handy for checking regional pricing in games, accessing content that's geo-locked for no good reason, or just not having my ISP log everything I do. The dynamic pricing angle alone has saved me money in the likes of airline, software, car rentals, all those things that charge differently based on location. With one smart booking, you quite literally can pay for your Nord subscription in what you save. On top of that, Threat Protection Pro blocks malicious sites and trackers before they reach you, essentially giving you an active layer of protection that's running in the background. And at nordvpn.com/Bellular Warcraft, you'll get an exclusive deal plus 4 extra months for free on a 2-year plan, and that's backed by the 30-day money-back guarantee. Xal'atath seems to know Voidstorm like it's her home, and it was even referred to as her homeworld by Maria Hamilton, one of the core developers in World of Warcraft. Yet, the Dominar tells us that she's only recently arrived. So what gives? Well, maybe this was her home. You see, long before she was trapped in the Blade or enslaved by Dimensius, she was a mortal who lived in a world named Predacia, and we know at least one group on that planet worshipped the light. Now that brings us to Xal'atath's supremacy animation. Disclaimers about Xal being an untrustworthy narrator aside, she tells Salhadar that she was once a mortal, and then we see this little girl. Look at her eyes, they are golden. And we see what almost looks like a light-forged marking around her eyes, and then, most telling of all, there's an amulet of the sun, and the sun is often a symbol of the light. Just say, look at the Tauren. We then see her turn to ash. But it isn't the void attacking a light world. This is the light ashing its own people. That's what it looks like anyway. And at the very last moment, the void takes Xal'atath's soul as a servant. And this is no longer a speculation. That's why I'm happy to, so they say, go to print with it now. You see, it's been backed up in a Voidstorm side quest. It's a side quest that shows us the apocalyptic end of Predacia and the birth of Voidstorm. Voidstorm is packed with Riftwalkers, and they're using their insider knowledge to help us turn the tide. But they're also finding crazy stuff out. One of the Riftwalkers finds these stone fragments. Like everything else, they're filled with void, but also something ancient. And then, a mysterious spectre begins speaking. It calls us powerful, and it rewards us with knowledge. Knowledge of Voidstorm's true name, of Predacia. Now, we follow this voice, we find more runestones, and as we do, we get a history lesson. It was a planet of civilizations and empires. Quote, the cities we built, the untold grandeur, the cities in the sky. That's how the stone reads. They sound like an advanced civilization, and with advancement comes, well, weapons of mass destruction. They talk about the first strike, of city after city falling, and an endless war. And we find out that during this period, they ask someone called Akanunti, I believe, to build a weapon so powerful it would end all wars. He obliged, and it worked. It worked too well. War did end, but it ended because all life was wiped from the planet. Now, we don't know if it was a weapon of the light, but the way Akanunti talks about it certainly gives that impression. He calls it beautiful, and once it was unleashed, he says it was unstoppable. So, we've got two things. Young Xal'atath being turned to ash, and this guy claiming that he destroyed the world of Predacia. Now, to confirm that these events are linked, we actually have to talk with Arator. Here's where this thread starts. The light responds to Liadrin's prayer and it sends reinforcements. That's the start of this expansion. The reinforcements are the light's vanguard. We follow them around Silvermoon as they fall deeper into a light-infused rage, and in the last desperate moment, we watch them shoot pure light into the Voidstorm. And this is where things begin to turn. Liadrin says she's never known the Sunwell's energy to be so violent. And if you go and stand in the Sunwell right now, it will kill your character. The Vanguard themselves are so extreme that they quickly look like an occupying army. They demand everything Silvermoon has to be sacrificed to the Sunwell. Perhaps a worthy endeavor in the eyes of the light, but Lorthamar knows that if they lose everything they're fighting for, then what's the point in fighting? He's worried about protecting his people from their own saviors. And amidst all that chaos, Arator finds himself tempted by the light blindness. A rage comes over him, and the light gives him the power he needs to shred the void. And that's when we get Arator's immolation cinematic. We see the rage, but we also see the aftermath. Arator realized the energy that just flooded his body could destroy everything he loves. We quite literally see how it burns him. And then Xal'atath taunts him, saying that in his darkest moment, when he needed the light the most, his light will turn to wrath, and that all that will be left is ashes. Is Xal'atath speaking from experience? Because the final scene of Immolation is a direct mirror to Xal'atath being turned to ash in supremacy. Here's a comparison on screen. Hopeless, abandoned, turning to ash. We don't know for 100% sure that it was the light that burned Xal'atath, but given all of these connections, all of these parallels, it does seem like that's Blizzard's implication. And of course, Xal'atath would know the consequences because she's experienced them. That was the beginning of her journey, and when the Void Tendril descended, it took whatever was left of her soul and made it a servant. Now, with that covered, we can put the three parts of this mystery together. We have Xal'atath's core wound, and it looks like she might be trying to replicate it on Azeroth. And to understand why ashing the surface of Azeroth with the light would actually be a good thing for Xal'atath, we need to look at the Lightbloom, and for that, we need to see what the zones are actually telling us. This is bamboo. Yep, bamboo. It's an invasive species in much of the world. Hyper successful. So successful that it creates deep underground networks that choke native plant life to death. In just a few growing seasons, it will consume all the land it can. And this is the Lightbloom, a phenomenon that acts like an invasive species in Quel'Thalas. Hyper successful, it creates deep, light-infused networks that choke the native plant life to death. And we see how in just a few days it has consumed much of Eversong. So, what are Blizzard telling us with this? Well, they're showing that the Lightbloom is basically an invasive species. It's out of balance with the local environment. It's deadly to anything that it touches. But why is it dangerous? Well, it's dangerous because it's infused with the light. And that might seem weird, thinking about a priest or a paladin in World of Warcraft. You know, often good guys. But we're being shown here what the light is like when it's concentrated into an area. When it's super concentrated, it dominates. With the Sunwell getting as powerful as it has, with all the light that we're pouring into it, we see that the Lightbloom around it gets even more fierce. We see it bind nature and force it to seek growth unending. That is the Lightbloom, and it's more than just a fun new environment. It is in fact key to Xal'atath's plan. In our questing, Halduran follows Orwayna to Harundar, where they discover the Lightbloom originates from the roots of the world tree Xal'atath. Now, Xal'atath was a void-corrupted world tree located in the Broken Isles. It was the Satyr Lord Xavius' stronghold in Azeroth with a direct connection to the Emerald Nightmare and the Rift of Uln. Now, it has since healed, but actually, that's the point. It was once wounded by the Void, and that left it open to light infection. You see, we know that light and void are two sides of the same coin, and now we're seeing that one can infect the wounds left by the other. The Lightbloom from Xal'atath is just one example of that. But on a planetary scale, it's what could have happened to Xal'atath's homeworld, turned to ash by the light, then infected with the void, turning Predacia into Voidstorm. And if we put the three parts of the puzzle together, it seems clear. Xal'atath tells us she's immortal, and we see her turn to ash. Then, Akintunde tells us that he wiped Predacia near clean of life, leaving it a fresh wound, of course, for the void to infect, driving the few surviving creatures toward eating and growing and consuming. And then we have Arator being told by Xal'atath that when he needs it most, the light will turn everything to ash. The simple math is that this all happened on Predacia, and what we're discovering is that it's basically Xal'atath's core wound, the thing that propelled her to eventually become the character we see today. So the big question is Xal'atath setting up the Sunwell as some kind of light nuke to ash Quel'Thalas, to ash the world? If her goal is to take the planet, then she sure has a very relevant example in what happened to her own homeworld, and perhaps she's rerunning that playbook. But for that to be true, we'd have to be doing things like, say, running around the place finding light artifacts to power up the Sunwell as much as is possible, sacrificing everything we have to make it more powerful. And that's actually exactly what we do in the main storyline of the Midnight expansion. So, let's see how this is playing out on the bleeding edge of the campaign. At the end of the Eversong leveling chain, Turalyon flies into a light-blind rage and tries to kill Zul'Jin. Arator jumps in the middle and does get himself hurt. He survives, but he realizes Turalyon had totally lost control and could no longer be counted on. Then him and Alonsis Fowl go on an adventure to realize that light users need a grounded conviction in order to keep the light's aggressive nature basically under wraps, basically handled. Things like Uther's healing kit, Chrome's smithing hammer. We then fly to the Scarlet Monastery for a quick lesson on what happens if you don't stay grounded. Then we go onward to Blackrock, where we recount Turalyon's battle against Doomhammer and realize that having unresolved trauma does in fact let the worst aspects of the light thrive. It makes a lot of sense for Turalyon, and it makes a lot of sense for the Scarlet Crusade, given everything that the humans of Lordaeron went through. Arator and Fowl then represent both control and balance in the light, and they've somewhat figured out how to give it to others. But outside of Liadrin keeping mostly cool-headed, we see the Light's Vanguard are getting themselves whipped up into a storm of righteous fury. And that's exactly what we face head-on in Nexus Point Zenith, where Lothraxion, a long-time loyal Lightforged Nathrezim, turns on us. Why? Well, because the Light demanded action so radical that we refused to follow through. And he just thought, well, you are not in alignment with what the Light wants, therefore, you're now basically my enemy. But it actually goes further than that. He's so full of righteous rage that he wants to blow up the Nexus Core, which would destroy his enemies, but it would also destroy Silvermoon. He was essentially willing to sacrifice the Blood Elf lands, and maybe them as a people, for dealing with this void-related problem. And that's essentially the problem. The ends justify the means for him. Now, during the fight, Lothraxion proclaims that the light will cleanse our world, and as he goes down, he promises that we will see it happen. Now, that's basically the light almost speaking through him. Remember just how taken he is by this stage. And with that, it's fairly clear that the light has a plan for us. And later on, near the pinnacle of the Void Spire, we see some of the Light's Vanguard's most powerful paladins go into a full light-blind rage because they think we are unworthy allies. So this is not the end of the Light-Blind storyline. We have killed a few big Light-Blind characters, but Turalyon's Light-Blind arc feels unresolved, and there are way more Light players waiting in the wings. Like, as an example, the Arathi, who have promised to turn up. And remember, we have been warned that we probably won't like them whenever they do. Bringing it all in then, it's clear that this story will dominate one of Midnight's patches. Blizzard did say this expansion is the big clash between Light and Void. We know what Void's plan is, we know the Xal'atath stuff, so where's the Light in this? I would say it's currently getting itself twisted in circles, trying to empower the Sunwell, and few are questioning if that is the right thing to do. And that brings us to the questions that will dominate the rest of Midnight's lore. Is Xal'atath getting us to empower the Sunwell so that she can use its power? That certainly would be a Xal'atath move. She's been powering up the likes of the Dark Hearts as just one of the main things she does for a long time. Then there's another question. Does the Light know that it could be being played by Xal'atath? Does the Light have its own scheme behind the scenes that'll explode into a patch, maybe 11.1 or 11.2? Is the Light truly being antagonistic, or is Xal'atath just playing us all for fools? Tell me what you think down in the comments, because I have a feeling we've just stepped into a big, glorious new era of lore speculation. And if you want to get ready to experience all this firsthand when the new raid drops, well, get your characters ready by watching this video next.